Well, we have a great guest today with a great book, Choosing Emotions, Thinking with Your Head and Acting with Your Heart. I've been wanting to talk about emotions for a long time. And when I got a notification from a PR agent that this book was out, I thought I better take a look into it. So I got a hold of the book and had a good study of it and looked through it quite a lot. And I found it quite interesting. And so the issue of emotions is very alive and well in all of us and very poorly understood. So I hope today we get a chance to bring some clarification to this important topic. And I thought the book, Choosing Emotions, has a great catalog of emotions. And I think it's really important because a lot of us don't really have the words to express how we feel, especially introverted people, I've found. And why I think having a catalog of emotions like that is good is because we can actually increase our context for how we feel and then enhance our communication, not only with ourselves, but with other people. And so I'm excited to have, the author's name is actually Doug Johnston. He goes by D. Earl on his book. And so I'm grateful to have Doug here. Doug, welcome.
Great to be here. It feels like friendly territory. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. So to start with, I'd love to just have you share a bit of an overview of your background and what led you to this interesting focus on emotions and what inspired your interest in emotions and why you think that's important today.
You bet. Well, thank you. My background includes many years as a corporate executive, mostly in banking and finance. And then laterally, about 10, 12 years ago, I morphed into becoming a testifying expert witness, which meant that I was a professional researcher hired by major law firms to help assist them in understanding high-stakes, complex business lawsuits. At that point in time, my daughter was in 8th grade, and she was a really good student. We established a game where instead of my giving her a sort of a standard monthly allowance, I decided I would try to have her earn it. So I would come to dinners. We would have father-daughter dinners every 2 weeks. I came to dinner with 200 questions each time that I'd researched. They could be about history. It is a lot. It was a lot of preparation, but it felt worth it. The questions could be about geography, history, math, science, entertainment, sports, could be about anything. But I also stopped by the bank on the way to dinner and picked up some cash. So every time she got a correct answer, I would slide a $2 bill across the table to her. So we came.
That's nice. They're
they are. Well,
now.
We called the game College Bowl, and it was perfect for her because she was an interested student. It was perfect for me because it gave me a rare chance as a father of a young teenager to know really what was going on in her life. So we had a lot of fun with it. 2 years later, she's in 10th grade, and she'd had an accident followed by surgery. She was out of school for a full month, which is, as you know, at that age, an eternity. And so she came to the College Bowl dinner, not with a big smile, but with a long face. And she said, "Dad, I need to ask you a question this time." And I said, "Sure, what is it?" She said, "What do you know about depression?" Well, Paul, I faked it. I mean, I came from a finance and banking background. So I gave her an economic answer, like it's a slowdown in business conditions accompanied by layoffs or something like that. And she held up her hand. She said, no, not that kind of depression. I mean, emotional depression. And I knew close to nothing about it. And so I said, "Sweetheart, I've got my own homework to do." And so I spent the next 2 weeks at Barnes & Noble online, surrounded by articles, 2 laptops, digging into what depression was, because I think really all I could have told you that was an extended period of sadness or something like that. What I found was that there's I'm aware that you've been a therapist for a good while. There are a lot of terrific psychologists who write terrific books, but too many of them, at least for my daughter, were full of acronyms and was sort of not relevant in a way. And I decided to take an approach where if I came across a quote from somebody, I would write it on a Post-it note. And about 3 days into my research, I came across a quote from Rollo May. I'm not sure if you know that writer. Rollo
Yeah.
was one of the first self-help authors in the 1950s before the term self-help was even popularized. He had his PhD and also, I think, a bachelor's in divinity and a very fine writer. He had survived depression himself. And his quote that I'd written down was, "Depression is the inability to construct a future." And that really grabbed me. That gave this idea of depression dimension to me. I suddenly had a much deeper understanding of what it was other than just being sad. A couple of days after that, I came across another note from another writer. I'm sure you know J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series. She had suffered terribly from depression as a young woman before she became a successful writer. Her quote about depression was, "Depression is that absence of being able to envision you will ever be cheerful again. It's the most unpleasant thing I've ever experienced." Well, suddenly, another quote, and I'm starting to get what this is all about, and I'm starting to think about my daughter more and more. A couple of days after that, I came across another quote from a freelance writer. She's not necessarily famous yet, but she's very talented. Her name is Haley Cornell. And her quote is, and I wrote this one down, "Depression lies. It tells you you've always felt this way and you always will, but you haven't and you won't." So one morning, surrounded by all these articles and laptops and the like, I decided it's 10 o'clock. I'm sure my daughter's in class. I'm going to text these 3 quotes to her, which I did. And I pressed send. It's 10 o'clock. She's in class. She probably shouldn't be looking at her cell phone, but she was. And minutes later, I get a text back from her. I'm crying. I was alarmed. I thought, "Sweetheart, I texted, why are you crying? These people all recovered from depression. There's hope." And her response was, "That's why I'm crying. Thank you, Dad." Well, that was a really nice father-daughter moment to us. But the bottom line was we were onto something, which is that emotions are probably best understood through the quotes of people who've lived them rather than a medical person, a therapist, like talking about them. So it's not what they look like, it's what they feel like. And that was sort of our operative. So we extended, I got her help, and her mother and I got her help, and she started to recover, but we were onto something interesting. And so we extended beyond depression to anxiety, to OCD, to bullying, to a longer list of emotions, all of them expressed through the quotes or phrases of people who've experienced them. And we were really onto something different. So again, it's not what it looks like, which is highly important. It's what it feels like. And I'm going to give you a case in point. As a therapist, you would understand this very easily. As an observer, you might look at somebody sitting at a table across the room with their hands folded and not saying anything, and you might conclude correctly that person is calm. I mean, they're not upsetting anybody or anything. They're sitting there calmly. And so you would say that person is calm. But in that person's world, they might be boiling mad. And so both things are true. One of which is the description from the outside, and the other is the description from the inside. But what we especially chose to do in the book was to address emotions from the inside, the inner experience, the inner dialogue of emotions, and ultimately went from depression and anxiety 9 years later. It took quite a while to assemble all this. 272 different emotional states as described through 8,000 quotes and phrases and terms of people who'd experienced them. And you can appreciate, if you'll recall the movie Forrest Gump from 20 or so years ago, there was a point in the movie where he's running across the country back and forth from East Coast to West. And finally, one day in the Utah desert, surrounded by hundreds of followers, he stops running. He says, "I've done it." Well, at that point for me was last August, September. I'd finally gotten sort of the last word. I felt I sort of had it and went to publish it. In January, the book is published, and a friend of mine called and said, "Gee, I took a look, and you really ought to submit this to AI." And I said, "Well, I'm not sure. I didn't use any AI in writing or compiling the book." He said, "Well, no, have AI critique it." And so imagine me, Paul, in front of a laptop, first experiencing Claude AI and holding my finger in the air. Do I really submit 130,000 words to AI, Claude AI, and ChatGPT?
Yeah, read that in two-tenths of a second.
It took maybe 2 seconds, but I decided, you know what, this is a purely human origin book. I'm content with it. I'm going to go ahead and see what Claude AI says. And so I pressed send. I held my breath, and moments later, the response came back. This is the most comprehensive consumer-facing reference on emotions in the English language. And that took my breath away. I blinked. I said, no, are you sure? You don't be a cheerleader here. I mean, I'm asking for a critique. Thank you very much. But and the answer was yes, 100%. That in terms of breadth and depth of emotional coverage, this is tops. And I said, well, how could that be? There are all sorts of dictionaries in psychology. The American Psychological Association puts out a huge dictionary. Oxford puts out a huge dictionary, and they do. But 25,000 entries in the APA dictionary, 11,000 in the Oxford Dictionary of Psychology. But they specialize in terms of clinical significance, and day-to-day emotions aren't always the highest on their list. So roughly 30% of the day-to-day emotions that I picked, from anxiety through empathy, through curiosity, through enthusiasm, zeal, wonder, roughly 30% of the emotions that I chose and that we collected in the book are not included in those dictionaries, which was a very big surprise. And so perhaps it is the case. It feels like it is now that the book has done something that really hasn't quite been done before.
I love quotes, and I collect lots of them. I have files and files of them in my computer, because when I'm writing, I'm always looking for something that will enhance or support or bring depth to what I'm saying. And I was blown away by the number, not only the number, but the quality of the quotes. And as a guy that's collected a lot of quotes, I'm looking at this going, this guy must have spent years trying to gather all these quotes, and they're not cheesy quotes. They're good quotes too, which I thought was really impressive.
It became a passion, and then it became sort of over the top, a fun story to share with you. So in my methodology, when I came across what I know is and the book describes as either a popular quote or a heartfelt quote, I would jot it down on a Post-it note. So I became king of Post-it notes. I had Post-it notes on the dashboard of my car because I heard something on the radio or in the song lyric. And so I would import them into my office. And Paul, on every wall, I had Post-it notes as I was trying to figure out how to curate them and sort them out. At one point, the landlord of my building knocks on the door and comes in. And I was so used to these Post-it notes, they were normal in my world. But to the landlord, I'm sure he thought, this guy must be leading an armed insurrection. This is the Symbionese Liberation Army. What is he doing? And I saw the look of horror on his face, and I said, oh, please, I'm writing a book. And we had a good laugh about that.
So funny. Oh, man. In my research on depression, I came across a quote years ago. I don't remember who said it, but it was quite appropriate. It defined depression as the fear that tomorrow will be the same as yesterday.
Oh, I love it.
And I think in many ways that quite nicely captures it.
It does. And as a therapist, you would know better than I, a depression sufferer basically says, I can't get out of bed. There's nothing that interests me. And I don't think that there ever will be something that interests me, but you do get past it and through it.
Yeah. It's a complex situation with many inputs that can lead to it. I've had more clients and patients with depression than I can even count, but looking back on all of them, it's rare that any two of them have the same inputs or same life experiences that lead to it. And it can range from, biochemical issues to deaths in the family to loss of loved ones. I mean, the list is very, very long. So I found you always have to really be very conscious of what exactly the person's inner story is and how that relates to the outer circumstances of their life, and then look at the many, many other factors I won't go into because it would railroad the podcast and would be a focus on depression. But in reading your book, I couldn't find a definition for what emotions are or an emotion is. Now, later, after you and I exchanged an email, I went and looked. I'd actually seen the appendixes, and I thought, oh man, I don't have time to read all this, but it looks like there's a lot of great information in here. And I realized you had definitions in the appendixes. If I would have given you feedback as an author, I would have said to put those up front, just because, I mean, I spent probably, I would imagine 3 hours just reading through the book. And I kept thinking, there's no definition of an emotion in here. But some of the descriptions that I found that you used included operating system, internal navigating system, adverbial drivers of behavior, subjective inner experience. And as I shared with you in our outline, I define emotions as the experience of energy and information flowing within and between human beings or any living being, because people can have deep emotional connections with animals, with plants, and even with objects like cars. So maybe what I'd like you to do is, if you want, you can expand on the sort of systems you've outlined, and then maybe your own thoughts on what you would define emotion as, maybe from a practical perspective that somebody could grab onto. That's what I tried to do with my own definition.
Some background here. My father was a really, really smart man. And when we were kids, I was the youngest of 4 brothers. He used to challenge us to bring a dictionary to the dinner table and to point to any word and then have him define it. And we almost never stumped him. And so the presence of dictionaries in my life has been disproportionate. I realize, Paul, it's kind of a nerdy thing to do, to write a dictionary. But we've come to call it not a dictionary. We've come to call it an emotionary. And which is a good word. A good friend of mine came up with the term, and I think it fits pretty well. Having researched 272 different emotions and emotional states through 8,000 quotes and phrases, I felt that I was sort of getting to the point where I was ready to take a stab at definitions themselves. I should add, and you probably know this yourself, that the professional lines in academia are somewhat reluctant to define emotions because they cross the academic silos. They cross the silos between psychology and literature and art and heart surgery, you name it. But if you're a highly credentialed academic, you're going to be pretty reluctant to ascribe your definition to some other specialty. I didn't have that problem because I'm not a psychologist. I'm a researcher. I sort of had the latitude to cover the waterfront. And in fact, the book includes contributions from, I think, 40 different religions, every culture, every gender, every international viewpoint that you could imagine. There's no religious bias. There's no political bias. It's why? Because emotions are the Rosetta Stone of human behavior. You know, a smile is always a smile, a frown is always a frown, and so forth. But I came up with sort of, at the end of it, Paul, a working model of a few things that I think were insightful. To me, emotions represent your operating system. So you might have a computer that has printers and other peripherals that feed data to a central processor, and the central processor makes decisions and then executes and tells your hands and arms. You get the analogy. So I think in many ways, our emotional system is very much like a computer operating system. It operates somewhat parallel to that. Secondly, I would say that I think it's pretty clear to me that our emotional system, and it is a system of heart, mind, body parts, and other influences, the first order of business is to protect us. And the second order of business is to allow us to investigate and expand and advance our lives. And if you understand that your emotional system's first order of business is to protect you, obviously touch a hot stove, you're going to withdraw your hand. Hang around angry people, you're going to want to withdraw. It helps us to navigate away from bad stuff, and it also helps us to investigate and navigate toward good things: love, curiosity, enthusiasm, excitement. And so I sort of tested that thesis of operating system and navigational, and I think it holds very nicely. I feel sure you would know who Lisa Feldman Barrett is.
Yeah, I've studied her book extensively. I tried to get her on the podcast, but said she was too busy to do podcasts at the time. I have to reach out to her. It's been about a year since I tried.
She's a really busy lady, as you know, and she teaches psychology. She's a neuroscientist at Northeastern University in Boston, and it's worth mentioning her background because as a clinician and a writer, she is now one of the top 1% most cited scientists in the world, which, obviously suggests that she's highly respected. Her synopsis of emotions are that they are prescriptions for action. Well, that makes perfect sense to me. I use the word navigation. I think they're very similar. But when I came across her sort of subscript definition, which is that emotions are prescriptions for action, I said, well, yes, that makes really good sense. You, in real time, you navigate away from things that are threats and dangers, and you navigate toward things that are interesting and helpful and help you advance your life. So I think both of those things hold pretty well. Operating system, because we sort of mimic the receipt, processing, and instructional commands of a computer, and navigational, because that's what emotions really do. So a question that I've often been asked, and I'm sure you've been asked many more times than me, is can we really choose our emotions? Aren't we sort of the prey of them? Well, you can be a victim or you can be a victor. But the moment you realize that emotions are tools to help you navigate your life away from bad stuff and toward good stuff, suddenly there's a small shift, at least there has been for me and others, in recognizing that they're not anything to be ashamed of or embarrassed by. They're tools. They're actually, a phrase I came up with is make friends with your emotions. Why not? They help you. It doesn't help you to burn your hand on hot.
That's actually pretty wise advice.
Well, there you have it. And it doesn't help you to burn your finger on a hot stove. On the other hand, you're glad you have the warning system. I feel sure that you have familiarity with Eckhart Tolle.
Of course.
He had several quotes that I've incorporated into the book. One of which is that when something happens to you, good or bad, assume that you planned it and move accordingly. Well, I scratched my head. I thought, wait a minute, if something bad happens to me, and the essence of that is you can learn from whatever is happening to you, and you are more in command, even when something terrible happens to you, like a car wreck. I mean, you'd say, well, why would I have ever planned a car wreck? Well, can you learn something from it? Almost certainly in almost every case in life, you can learn from bad stuff. And it is empowering to muse for a moment. Maybe is it possible that I wanted to teach myself something from that episode? And I thought that was pretty enlightened of him. And I sort of kept that at heart.
Sleep is the foundation of vibrant health, influencing everything from energy and mood to cravings, recovery, immune function, and longevity. Yet millions of people struggle to fall asleep or stay asleep, and still more wake up feeling tired and unrested. The problem is that sleep isn't controlled by a single switch. It's a complex biological process that involves so many different parts of the body. That's why most sleep solutions fall short. They only address one part of the process. You need to support the sleep-wake cycle from start to finish. Fortunately, Paleo Valley has just released their brand new, super tasty superfood sleep protein drink. It combines 100% grass-fed bone broth protein, food-derived melatonin, whole food magnesium, and clinically studied calming superfoods such as tart cherry, Ceylon cinnamon, and organic chamomile to help you unwind, restore, and achieve deep, restful sleep. Rather than relying on one isolated synthetic ingredient to force drowsiness, it brings together multiple whole food nutrients that help move your body through the stages of sleep, calming the nervous system, regulating your circadian rhythm, stabilizing blood sugar, and supporting overnight repair. This formula helps your body gently transition into sleep, stay there more consistently, and wake up feeling restored. So add Paleo Valley's superfood sleep protein to your nighttime ritual. It's a delicious strawberries and cream drink without added sugar or sugar alcohols to help you unwind and get ready for bed. Go to paleovalley.com/Chek15 to get your special Spirit Gym with Paul Chek discount and try Paleo Valley's superfood sleep protein today. That's paleovalley.com/Chek15.
Yeah, there's many things that I would like to dive into there, but I think I have things coming up in the outline where I get more toward the issue of things like choosing your emotions. So I'll save it for then. One of the things that I know from, because I spend a huge amount of my time working with people who have illnesses and challenges because of shall we say, conditioned behaviors or avoidance patterns or addictive tendencies and behaviors and patterns. And years ago, I don't know if you've ever read this book, but it's very good. It's called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath.
Not familiar with it.
And it's all about, you'd love it. Just from what I've learned of you so far, it's right up your alley. The title simply switch, like switch the light on, but it means switching your behavior. And they use a system there to help understand what it takes to change behavior. And so they have three kind of icons: the rider, which is the intellect, the elephant, which is emotion. So in the imagery, they show a little guy riding a huge elephant, and then the path, which is the plan. So when I'm working with a patient or a client or an athlete and I'm developing a program, I have to make sure that I'm addressing the needs of the rider. I have to make sure that it's emotionally connecting and fulfilling, and that I address their emotions, or the elephant will not listen to the rider. In other words, the intellect says, oh, I've got to do this to get rid of my back pain. But if the elephant says, well, I hate my job, and if I get rid of my back pain, I'm going to have to go back to work. If I don't address that as a therapist, then I'm going to have it could be a great program on paper, but it's not going to work. And the point that they make clearly is that the emotions are so much more powerful than the intellect that you don't have a chance if you're trying to address the intellect without considering and working with the emotional issues involved in the change process. So I think, having worked with so many patients and having, had to go through a lot of years of like, why do I keep writing these programs for people and they don't do them? And then they come back and keep complaining. Once I studied Chip and Dan Heath's work and put more effort in paying attention to what emotional states they were having and looking into where that was coming from, and including time to really explore these emotional states and the challenges that led to them, then I was able to actually start structuring programs so that they could see how this helped them deal with whatever the issue was that was causing the insecurity, the anxiety, the depression, the grief, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what I'm trying to share that you obviously know, but for the listeners, that emotions are far more powerful than the intellect. And you don't really have a chance to get that elephant to move if you're not addressing its needs.
I love the elephant and rider metaphor. It's very powerful. I'd like, and I love what you just brought up because I'd like to address it. There are three things that I sort of discovered in this lengthy 9-year process that shifted my thinking quite a lot. The average person, Paul, as you well know, there's no average person on earth. Everybody's unique in one or more ways, but collectively we're average. So the average person has three fundamental misunderstandings about emotion. The first of them is, if you were to Google this, you'd find this correct. The average American, average person, thinks that they're between 8 and 28 emotions total. And yet they're easily into the low hundreds. Why? Because I've documented them. I mean, and these aren't high-tech emotions. These are bullying, confidence, flirtation, blushing, empathy, resentment, provocation, silence, lust, curiosity. I mean, the list is into the low hundreds. But the average person thinks that there are only a few dozen. All right. So that'd be number one. Number two of which is the average person tends to think that emotions are very sporadic and that we are otherwise calm, rational beings. In essence, last Tuesday, my boss was annoyed with me. This morning, my wife was very cheerful. Tomorrow, I'm going to be very excited because I'm going to a concert. And so the average person tends to think that emotions are widely separated by time and that the rest of the time we're quite rational. That brings us to number three, which is, I'll explain that, about the issue of sporadic emotions not being sporadic, they're continuous. What do I mean by that? Let's assume it's a Saturday afternoon. You're in your living room. There's no one else there. You think, I'm lonely, I'm bored, I'm going to turn on the TV. You grab the remote, you're curious, you turn on the TV. So you shifted from lonely and bored to curious. You turn on the TV. A show appears, it's a rerun, you've seen it, you're bored with that. You change the channel, it's a sports game, somebody's ahead by 20 points, not very interesting, you're bored. You put down the remote, you think, I'll head to the kitchen and see what's going on there. You're curious. You walk into the kitchen, you see the refrigerator, you're excited. You remember that goodie you left in there last night. You open the refrigerator door, aha, exaltation. There it is. There's that goodie that I left last night. You reach for it, and at that moment, your cell phone goes off. You're annoyed. It's a telemarketer. You figure out how to get rid of the telemarketer. You're back to your goodie. You're satisfied. Then you're bored, and you think, oh, I'm going to call Charlie and see if Charlie wants to go to the gym. The point being that we are always morphing from one emotional navigator to the next. And so emotions aren't sporadic. Even when you're dreaming, you are morphing from one emotional state condition to another. All right. So
I think even more intensely quite often.
Could very well be. The third fundamental misunderstanding, and I'm getting back to your point a moment ago, the average person, whether this is the influence of things such as the Star Trek TV series decades ago, where you had Mr. Spock, the Vulcan with the purely rational, viewpoint, who would occasionally
AI in a body.
He would occasionally, reference how annoyed he was with these pesky humans and their emotions. All right, but look at the show. The captain was the emotional Captain James T. Kirk, who had a blend of reason and emotion. Right. My point with all that is the average person believes that emotions are inferior to reason and logic. That if you're living a good...
Yeah, that's a very big mistake.
It's an enormous mistake. And in fact, virtually all of the Nobel level and Honda Prize level scientists in the world are in virtually unanimous agreement that emotions are foundational to logic. You can't use reason unless you have emotions to assign value to your thoughts. And Antonio Damasio, I'm sure, is a name you know. Antonio Damasio teaches neuroscience at USC, not too far from you. He has led the way in identifying that we are feeling machines that think and not thinking machines that feel. And so it's widespread, not only
Right.
Antonio Damasio, but Jonathan Haidt at NYU, the Daniel Kahneman at Princeton, all of the most highly revered and respected scientists in the world agree that emotions are primary, not secondary. And so the moment you realize that, emotions often get a bad rap, you might say, well, Mary was being emotional yesterday, as if that's a bad thing. Well, excess emotions, not a great thing, but emotions are foundational. And if you realize that emotions get you reason and logic, that's a subtle shift that changes your life.
It is. While you were speaking, I had a thought come to my mind, and what I wrote down is that emotions are feelings that may escape intellectual context. And I think that's important because a lot of times people's behavior doesn't make sense to us. And I think because in many instances, we're seeing the acting out of an emotion, but we ourselves as viewers can't make context of it. And often they themselves later say, I don't know why I said that, or I don't know why I did that. The point there that I'm really making is that not only is the panoply of emotions such that it, until someone like, I think you're probably the first one that's really done this, right? You really put a lot of years into work to try to capture the really massive bouquet of emotions. That you put a lot of colors in this rainbow, so to speak. But I think because we're in a very left brain culture, if people can't nicely package something, then in a kind of a logical way, then it just looks like somebody's acting strange, or there's something wrong with them from the context. Like if you go into a restaurant and you see a husband and a wife having a big fight at the dinner table, we automatically get irritated. we like tell them to shut up and get out of here. But you see, those two people would probably get irritated if somebody else was having a fight at the dinner table, but their emotions are so powerful, it overrides logic. And because we can't feel their emotions from the outside, we try to project our own rational construct on it. And you can't do that because you don't know what is driving the experience inside the person. And I think often people themselves don't.
What's helpful, thank you. What's helpful, I think, is understanding the importance of a person's inner dialogue. They may
Yes,
look calm
absolutely.
on the outside. They might be boiling mad or ecstatic on the inside. You don't really know. But what the book has helped focus on is those terms and phrases that match your internal dialogue. So I'm gonna
Right.
put myself as if I'm in a chair in your office and you're the therapist. All right. So your first question to me as a therapist would be essentially something like, what's bothering you? What are the issues? All right. Well, let's say that I'm struggling for words. People often struggle for words to describe how they feel. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You've seen it probably hundreds, maybe thousands of times. They struggle for words to articulate the way they feel. So let's say that I'm not sure I know what I feel, and I mutter to you, "Well, doctor, I'm anxious all the time. I'm anxious all the time." And so you make a note as a therapist, he's anxious, and so you start to calibrate to anxiety. But what if the real problem is that I didn't have the words to express that I'm really suffering from addiction? And anxiety and addiction are very different things, and they outline very different paths for you as my therapist. All right. So in the book, for example, it's laid out alphabetically from abundance through zeal, 272 different states. What we've done for each and every one of those 272 states is come up with, in round numbers, 20 to 40 different terms and phrases and quotes from people who've experienced that. So that might allow you as a therapist, if you sense that your patient is struggling for words, look at this page. See if there's a phrase or a quote that matches your internal dialogue, which matches what you're really feeling. Well, that's an easy thing for a patient to do because they're not struggling for words. They are simply looking at a list and they're going, that's it, that one there, that's the way I feel. So this emotion area, as we're calling it, which describes the quotes of people who've experienced emotions, the terms and phrases that they use every day, has a real therapeutic effect on helping align, I'm going to jump out there with this, align your heart and your head as two different areas that sort of influence your emotions.
Yeah, I think it's got a lot of value. That's why I wanted to talk to you about it and let people know about the book. I'm grateful to have it in my library. I have an entire shelf that's full of dictionaries and histories of words and histories of ideas and histories of, everything. Etymology. I got dictionaries that, weigh 12, 15 pounds. They're so big. Because I think it's so important to be clear about what we're communicating. And it's also important to understand where words come from and what is the meaning of these things at a deeper level.
If I may, and this is going to take a couple of minutes, and please, Paul, cut me off if you think it goes too long. I spent a fair amount of time researching not only words, of course, it's a dictionary, it's an emotionary, it's 272 different emotional states, but also especially the importance of words to solving problems. And so I came up with something that's called a consilience. You may have heard that word. I went through 13 different academic disciplines to see what the smartest people, the Nobel level, Honda Prize winning, PhD level people said about the importance of words. So first, I'm going to give you the disciplines that I covered, the academic disciplines. So physics, philosophy of language, engineering, linguistics, clinical psychiatry, psychotraumatology, there's a big word, literature, neuroscience, psychology, art, logic, and philosophy. So I came up with quotes from leaders in each of those, and anthropology, that's 13. Each of them had very relevant quotes about the importance of words to solving problems. So I'll read a few of them. Niels Bohr, that may or may not be a name you remember. He's a Danish-born, as I recall.
I'm very familiar. I study quantum physics all the time.
There you have it. So Niels Bohr was a contemporary of Albert Einstein. Many think that he was certainly on par with him. Niels Bohr won a Nobel Prize, so he's certainly no slouch. Here's his quote. What is it that we humans ultimately depend upon? We depend on our words. We are suspended in language. All right, this is a mathematician, a nuclear theoretical physicist, right?
Yeah.
And he's talking about the importance of words.
Yeah.
All right, next up is Ludwig Wittgenstein. He's Austrian, rose to prominence in
philosopher.
He's known as one of the heads of the philosophy of language. Here is his quote. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. What a simple and beautiful phrase that is. The limits of my language are the limits of my world.
Yeah.
Next up on my list is Charles Kettering. You may know the Sloan Kettering Clinic in New York City, the anti-cancer, one of the best in the world. Charles Kettering was an engineer, and he made his fortune as an engineer, the top engineer for General Motors. So he's not purely a scientist, he's more of an engineer. He held 186 patents in his life. His quote, a problem well stated is a problem half solved. What a beautiful remark.
Yeah. Well, you have to define what the issue is, or how do you know how to
do
address
it in words. And so now I'll move on to just two more for now. Noam Chomsky, who is the father of modern linguistics, he's in his late 90s. I think he now moved from Harvard and all down to Brazil. His quote as the founder of modern linguistics, language etches the grooves through which your thoughts must flow. Another tribute to the importance of words to solving problems. And then lastly, for now, just one more, one of my favorites, Dan Siegel from UCLA, also near you. He is a multi-published, best-selling author and a clinical psychiatrist.
I've read
You
probably all
probably
his
have read them all
books.
twice, would be my guess. But his quote, the five very, very famous words should be cast in stone, in my view. Name it to tame it. If you can assign words to your problem, you were halfway to solving it. All right. And so the theme, I don't know that I need to read all 13 of them, but the theme is absolutely consistent across all these disciplines. I'll read one more. Here's from William Shakespeare from Hamlet. Suit the action to the word and the word to the action. It's all about having vocabulary at the highest levels. The mathematicians, the scientists all agree. It's about having the right words.
Yeah. Just since you mentioned Siegel's comment there, name it to tame it, I take that to a one-step level deeper. And I believe I got this from studying Stanley Krippner's work. You know who Stanley Krippner is? He's a famous psychologist, and he wrote an excellent book on mythology and how mythology functions and the depth of how that's relevant to our life, just like language is, because really myth is story. And the method that he suggests, which I find better than name it to tame it, is name it, blame it, and tame it. So, for example, if you find yourself with anger issues, Krippner's approach is name it. There's the angry dragon in me, blame it. When the angry dragon shows up, I behave in ways that damage relationships. Tame it. I don't need to be angry right now. I can compose myself and I can choose to be present with this person. The point is that the blaming it allows you to be conscious of what happens when that negative emotion, feeling, or behavior shows up, so that you can connect the thought, feeling, and emotion to the behavior that's antagonistic to the person you're choosing to be in the moment.
That's pardon me for interrupting.
If you just name it, you don't really don't know what you're taming yet.
That's so powerful. In fact, yesterday a good friend of mine called me trying to articulate what you just said, but he left out the blame it. He said, I need to put this on the table, and that's the blame it. And I'm going to call him after our call, and I'm going to say, hey, I found through Paul Chek the answer.
Yeah, name it, blame it, and tame it. And the reason that's important is because you're making a cognitive and even more, not just cognitive, but a deep feeling connection to what it is that emotion or that belief or that insecurity triggers in you that causes you to react or behave in a way that actually isn't congruent with who you choose to be in the moment. And I think from a spiritual development perspective, you had a beautiful, stunningly powerful quote from Edgar Cayce in your book. Your spiritual development is determined by your worst behavior, not your highest understanding, which is
it's a
really
remarkable
powerful
quote. I love it too.
And so the point is if you know what you're blaming, you say you might be recognizing a worst behavior, and now you recognize when that dragon shows up that you just have to slow down a bit. This is where I often quote Zig Ziglar, who says, you don't want to be ready, fire, aim. So the blame it is the ready, let me make sure I'm pointing at what I want to point at. Aim before I fire.
I love that. I really love that. There were so many times in researching this book late at night that I would come across a word an emotion that I thought I understood and did not. And realized, oh my gosh, if I'd known that 10 years ago, I would have taken a different path. But the exercise was really enlightening. And, somebody like Edgar Cayce, who at some levels people dismiss him, but if you read his works, he's so obviously a wise man. His words speak for himself.
Very much so.
Yeah.
So did his results. What was almost 2,000 accurate readings on people and intuitive and predictive readings on their health and on their life. I mean, I've studied a number of books on his life and his work, so I know his work very, very well. But to dismiss Edgar Cayce would be a big mistake.
He's a wise man, and I think smart people get that. Again, my process was that I was not bound to only scientists. I could include artists. I could include sculptors. I could include actors.
Anybody.
I could include, this book is not at all heavy on Hollywood celebrities. It's not about that. It's about, did you have an insight? Did you experience something, and did you put it in words that you can share with other people that's insightful to them, that helps them with their lives? And I find Edgar Cayce among many. There are 1,800 contributors to this book, and that's why it took 9 years to find them all. But so many of them are immensely helpful.
You have to try Organifi's Creatine Cherry Chews, a sports gummy designed to enhance performance and recovery. Containing the highest quality creatine monohydrate sourced from Germany, together with Vita Cherry, a tart cherry extract known for its antioxidant properties, Organifi's Creatine Cherry Chews are free from additives, sweeteners, or fillers and taste amazing. They are the perfect exercise enhancer because your body uses the creatine for energy immediately. Take 2 gummies before or after your workout, and most people will feel the difference in just 2 weeks of consistent use. Used regularly, creatine can increase endurance and muscle strength, help reduce muscle cell damage, assist with recovery, and support cognitive function and focus. To try Organifi's Creatine Cherry Chews and save 20% off your order, go to Organifi.com/Chek20 and use the promo code Chek20. That's Organifi.com/Chek20, and the code for your 20% discount is Chek20.
I'll share another approach that is also helpful along the lines of name it, blame it, tame it. And I don't know if you've ever worked with this one. And I got this from Stanley Krippner as well. He says, see it, see what it is that you're experiencing, free it, let go of it if it's not congruent with who you're choosing to be in the moment, and then be it. Be the person that you know is who you're choosing to be. In other words, exercise your free will. So see it, free it, be it. And I think that these types of things are very helpful, especially when we have a bit of a crisis in the world right now, where we have so many adults that are really, from a psychological perspective, only developed to the level of a child. And that's based on research. Ken Wilber cites research showing that 2 different studies. One says 70% of the world's adults are still at child level psychological development. Another one says 72%. And you can see that in politicians, for example. Donald Trump would be a great example. They should have taken his cell phone away from him when they made him president. I mean, I'm not trying to take a political position, because I think it's all, excuse the expression, but fucked up. But I think anybody that's ever seen Donald Trump's tweets knows that his emotional development is limited. And so if Donald would see it, free it, and be it more often, we would have a better kind of sense of what the United States represents.
I'm going to give you a happier time politically. If I may, I'll take you back to World War II. Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of England at the time. And if you'll consider the year is 1943, 1944, the Nazis are starting to launch buzz bombs across the English Channel that were landing in random neighborhoods across London, killing people indiscriminately. You'd wake up one morning, your neighbor would be dead. It might be you. And the nation was gripped in fear, which was exactly what the Nazis wanted. And of course, they didn't have television then. So Winston Churchill takes to the BBC radio to give a nationwide broadcast. And these are 8 words that I wish we had politicians of his caliber today. Keeping in mind, Paul, he's speaking to a nation gripped by fear. The Nazis are coming, etc. Here is his quote: "Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. those are 8 words that so beautifully describe what your emotional system is all about. You can react or you can act. You can be a victim or you can be a victor. And ultimately, you may know this, Winston Churchill won the Nobel Prize for Literature because he had a pretty unique ability to capture ideas. I long for days of statesmen rather than politicians, but I greatly admired his remarks.
True statement. There's a lot of great quotes by Winston Churchill. I've seen many of them in my career. I probably have a bunch of them saved. He was very good at encapsulating things in ways that had depth. And one of the quotes that I created for working with people of all types is that fear never makes a good seeing eye dog.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to write that one down.
I was a paratrooper. So, in our training, we had a lot of training on not losing your military composure. Because if the guy standing next to you gets his head blown off and you lose composure with a weapon in your hand, you might kill the other guy standing next to you. So it's and that's another issue too. We have to be careful too with repressing our emotions. And when you're a soldier, you really have to shut down certain emotions because emotions that could be interpreted as a survival reaction, like run, aren't actually effective for a soldier. And one of the things that I have to work with as a therapist a lot is that people are suffering from a lot of health problems from repressing their emotions. And I read a book years ago. I can't remember the author's name, but it was very profound. In the title of the book, it's Feelings Buried Alive Never Die. And so the whole field of emotions, especially for someone like me that's a therapist, is very, very deep and very, very complex. And I think, one of the things we have to be careful with emotions is to not make the mistake of thinking that just because we can describe them with a few words or a quote, that we've actually captured the depth, the nuance, the dynamic power of them, because then we can actually mislead ourselves and fall short on even our own inner dialogue of what am I feeling right now? Because there's also it's just like the rainbow. Nobody can accurately take a pinpoint and say, this is where red becomes yellow or yellow becomes green. And I think emotions are very much like that. Even though a rainbow looks like red colors, it's millions of colors, right? And so I think it's important for me as a human being and as a therapist to not try to quickly intellectualize an emotion, because that usually imports a right brain process into the left brain, and it leads to trying to rationalize, justify, or capture something in only the words that you have to capture it with. But emotions, like your book demonstrates very clearly, are far more diverse and broad than we can easily just
It's a wonderful point. And I in the methodology of the model that we're calling an emotionary, it captures that. It says, here is the standard. If you were to open up Webster's dictionary, here's the standard objective definition of that emotion. But here are also 20 to 40 different takes on that emotion from people who've experienced it. And so you get that spectrum context much better. And to me, it's been an eye opener so many times to get the shades and nuances of it. There are so many times that I would burst out laughing and I think, my God, how beautifully written, or my gosh, if I had only known that when I was younger. But that's part of life.
Yeah, just to highlight the point, there's been more times than I could probably add up in my head where I've been working with patients and I've asked them to describe what they're feeling, and they go quiet for a minute and they look at me and they say, Paul, I just don't know. I just know that I don't feel good, or I don't feel happy or satisfied or whole or some descriptor, but they can't they don't have a lexicon for the experience that they're having on the inside.
And possibly they're reluctant to venture their own words because they don't want to be embarrassed or whatever. And that's another way that the book assists. If you can see that 20 or 30 or 40 people before you who went on to do well express their own suffering, express their own heartache, express their own pain, suddenly you're not so overwhelmed thinking you're the only one. And it's helpful. It's helpful to see how other people have expressed themselves. Very helpful.
I found reading the quotes for like a number of the emotions that I read through in your book. I found that reading the quotes was like, you know origami where they fold things into shapes. So let's just call anger a cube, for example. But then you open it up and all of a sudden you realize that inside the cube is another cube and inside that cube is another cube. And then by the time your one page is open, you can see that there's hundreds of little squares on there. And so I felt like your quotes were like the origami of an emotion. You know, it was like the infolding and the unfolding.
I love that description.
Together.
Thank you. I had not articulated it that way, but I think you're right. It is an attempt to unfold an emotion so that you can look at it from different perspectives. And emotions are on a spectrum. I mean, there's death at the bottom. You're not feeling too much, when you're dead, of course, on up to euphoria. Not here. Maybe you're somewhere else feeling wonderfully, but for human purposes, pardon me, just a sidebar. My father had a favorite expression. He said, "I'm not worried about life after death. I'm worried about life after birth."
Yeah.
But they're on a spectrum from death to euphoria or wisdom, whatever the highest level. And we're on a pathway. Everybody suffers. Everybody suffers in life. Everybody experiences pain in life. You're not alone. Yeah. And seeing how other people put it in words is often very rewarding and uplifting.
Well, I think everything you just said is true, but I would also flip the coin and say there's also just as many states of not suffering. And if a person's limited in their ability to realize that, it can lead to suffering.
One of my favorite emotions, pardon me for talking about my parents, but I came from them. So
that's all right.
They're each gone now. They each lived into their 90s, and I asked each of them as I helped them write their own obituaries, which was a special exercise. I asked my father, I said, "Dad, what one single word in the English language you use to describe yourself?" And I had a few in my mind that I thought he would. He looked at me within 2 seconds and he said, "Warrior. I'm a warrior." And I thought, wow, I would never have expected him to say that. And then almost exactly a month ago, my mother passed away at 2 months short of 99. But I asked her, "What word, Mom, would you best use to describe yourself?" And she responded instantly, "Enthusiasm." My mother was an extremely active, go-getter type person. All right, so I shared that with my own therapist. And the therapist said, "So your father was a warrior and your mother was enthusiasm. Is it any surprise you would be an enthusiastic warrior?"
Exactly. That's the first thought that went through my mind.
My jaw dropped. I said, "My God, it's so simple. And yet, it's it. That's it."
Yeah. Yeah, really good. Doug, your book, as we've been describing, catalogs entries that many readers, and likely including you, would not classify as emotions proper. Your own website, choosingemotions.com, lists attitude, parenting, memory, nutrition, belief, creativity, art, wisdom, and quantum concepts alongside anger, joy, and fear. You appear to treat the book as a map of emotional conditions and emotional life topics rather than strictly emotions. So can you share your criteria for inclusion, and where and how do you draw the line between emotion, a mood, a condition, a pattern, or a life
Love
topic?
the question. So as I mentioned, I started with depression and anxiety, and then we went into bullying, something that high school kids would know about. The list kept expanding, and I did not know, Paul, where it would lead. But ultimately, it led to the recognition that to cover this correctly, it had to include emotions, fear, anger, joy, etc., and emotional states, like OCD is an emotional state. Obsessive compulsive disorder is a disorder, but it's an emotional state. So there are many emotional states covered. There are also meta contributors to emotion. And by that, I mean outside influences that of course influence your emotions, such as hydration, nutrition, conscious breathing. There are quite a few of those. And to really do justice to it, I didn't put down my pencil, so to speak, until July, August, until I sort of had a couple months under me where I said, I think I've covered the major ones here. One of the emotional states that was the last and probably should have been the first was trauma. And if you'd asked me 4 years ago what I knew about trauma, I would have been pretty short with you. I would have said, well, a car accident, an ambulance, and an emergency room. That would have been about all I would have articulated about what trauma was. And I've come, obviously, through this research with a much deeper and I think better understanding of trauma. And I'm going to give you an inexact definition, but I think this will hold muster with the top trauma experts. Trauma would be defined as an event occurs to you, either physically or emotionally, that overwhelms your capacity to cope with it. And effectively, in trauma, whether you got knocked out in an auto accident or you were raped or something overwhelmed you physically and or emotionally, and you shut down. Your emotional system shut down. All right. But your emotional system's prime directive is to protect you. And so if your body actually shut down, your emotional system is going to be stuck there in repetition until you, and I love Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, arguably one of the top traumatologists in the world. He said, I've read it twice. I'm going to read it 3 times. He writes so beautifully. He says, in essence, you're going to be stuck there until you find the words to describe what overwhelmed you. And I thought, wow, how eloquent, how thoughtful. You are going to be stuck repeating that episode until you find the words to describe what it was that overwhelmed you. All right. So back to my rough and tumble upbringing as the youngest of 4 boys. The ethic in our family was if you don't have a bone sticking through your skin, you're faking it. I mean, it was get over it, pull yourself together. We don't talk about our problems. And now I'm on the other side, which is it's all about it. If you've experienced trauma, if you have someone in your life who's experienced trauma, they will get out of it if they can finally put words to it, words to what happened to them. And it comes out of being a fear-based, my system shut down and it's stuck there, to I can now talk about it. It's an unhappy memory, but I can talk about it as a memory and move on.
Yeah, I would add a little something to that for you. I'm in the business of helping people heal from trauma. And there are countless cases in which people cannot put words to the experience within themselves that they're having. And so many, many years ago, I studied art therapy extensively, practiced it. I'm an artist. You can see some of my paintings back there on the wall. And I teach art therapy. And I found that I can take people that are kind of trapped in this inability to contextualize what they're feeling emotionally, especially in trauma cases, and just give them a paintbrush and a bunch of color and say, don't think about it. just paint what you're feeling. Just don't even attach any assignment of judgment of value or beauty or anything to it. Just let it out. And it's amazing to see how a paintbrush, a canvas, and some colors and a complete freedom to just let it out leads a person to depressurize the repressive mechanism to the point that now the conscious mind feels safe to connect to what it is they're feeling. And then what I can say is, okay, now just describe, I see a lot of red. It looks like you just threw red at the canvas. What would you describe? Why do you think you chose red? Oh, that's my anger. Well, look, you've got a lot of black here too. You've got a lot of black surrounding the red and going through the red. What does that mean to you? That's my confusion as to why my spouse or my father or whatever would harm me like this way. I can't find meaning for that. So I think that for those people listening that don't realize that they could be trapped in an emotional state and unable to express it in a way that they can seek to make meaning out of it, you can begin literally by just doodling it. You don't even have to have you don't have to have any fancy paints or anything. You can just start taking a pencil and doodling it and just let it out, and don't judge it. Just let it flow. And it opens the gateway to a connection between the brain and the body.
To communication. I love that. Art therapy. It makes perfect sense. It's an easy way to begin to communicate. That's lovely.
I've got something great that helps me before going to sleep and in the morning. Actually, anytime I want to calm, center, and improve mental clarity. Personally, I wouldn't have ever expected you could experience all these benefits in one product, but I know from experience that you can with Peak's RE Fountain. In fact, I'm drinking some right now as I share this tip with you. Not only is mental clarity essential for my work in creating educational content for the Chek Institute, my Spirit Gym students, and writing podcast outlines, I love RE Fountain before bed because I love having clarity when I'm dreaming. Dreams are important means of getting guidance from the soul, and that can literally be life-changing. Additionally, did you know that one bad night of sleep can take up to 4 days to recover from? I don't have that kind of time to spiral down. RE Fountain has proprietary triple Biomax magnesium that helps me unwind and relax for the night, so I wake up feeling sharp, focused, and calm. Best of all, it's free of artificial and natural flavoring and maltodextrin. Unfortunately, most electrolytes are loaded with maltodextrin, artificial and natural flavorings, sweeteners, and unnecessary fillers. RE Fountain skips all of that, and the lemongrass flavor is amazing. I invite you to join me in being more relaxed, clear, and able to build your dream during the day and take advantage of your night dreams too. For a limited time, get up to 20% off for life when you start your first month of RE Fountain today, and I know you'll thank me as soon as you try it. Save 20% on RE Fountain at peaklife.com/Paul Chek. That's PIQUE life.com/Paul Chek. It's awesome, and I know you're going to enjoy it. Yeah, and there's other therapies too, such as sand play. I have a rock garden. I take people out into the rock garden. I remember when I was a kid, sometimes I'd be so pissed off at my dad, I would just want to go and throw rocks as far as I could to release the emotion. So there's a variety of things. There is help. People just have to look for it. Now, having studied emotions a fair bit myself, I concluded that if we reduce all possible emotions to their core essence, all emotions could be classified as, if to use a Taoist conception, expressions of yin, which is water, which is related to love and connection, and then yang, which would be like fire, which is the feeling of exclusion. And because there's so many emotions, I've actually seen people criticize. I mentioned this once in a video or something. Somebody just tore me a new butthole for this. But I really feel that if you take emotions and what they're really doing for us, at the very essence, they're either saying it's safe to connect or it's not safe to connect. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
With that. To go back to what I said a moment ago or a few moments ago, first order business of emotions, your emotional systems to protect you, is to keep you alive, keep you to survive, help you to survive. The second is, once that's covered, you get to expand and advance your life. But priority number one is protect yourself. And whether that's articulated as yin yang, I'm not sure. I haven't thought about that, but it makes perfect sense what you just said.
Well, yin's the feminine, and yin by definition is an energy that draws into its center and expands. So a simple way to understand yin, if you take a piece of bread and throw it in a bowl of water, it'll suck that water up until it's saturated, and then it'll begin to drip. If you pick it up, it'll drip. If you take that same piece of bread and throw it in a frying pan, the heat will expand all the water out of it. It'll collapse into itself until it becomes charcoal. And so there you see yang spends energy and resources and radiates outward centrifugally, where yin is centripetal towards its center and it accumulates. So the fact of accumulation is to draw in. So if I'm giving you a hug, I'm drawing you into me, I'm connecting to you. But if I'm going to punch you, that's radiating out from my center and it's going to push you away. So if I'm going to punch you, it means there's something I'm afraid of or I'm angry at. So those two energies are the energies that create the entire universe. If you study Taoism, and even Niels Bohr and many of the quantum physicists studied Taoism and the Tao Te Ching and many other of the Eastern philosophies, because they found that it gave them context for what they were seeing in quantum physics.
I love the background. I need to study more of that.
Just get Stephen Mitchell's translation of the Tao Te Ching, DAO-TAO-TE-CHING. It's a beautiful book, only 84 verses of poetry. It explains everything that's happening in the universe. And that's how you know how wise Lao Tzu
I'm on
was.
it. Thank you. That's great insight. I can't wait to dive into that. And I'm embarrassed that I haven't.
Then get the, oh, yeah, it's okay. It'll be beautiful. You're at a point in your life where it'll really mean a lot to you. Then get the second book of the Tao by Stephen Mitchell, because that's also very juicy. And you can get both of those on audio if you prefer listening on audio. I would read the Tao Te Ching first, though. The second book of the Tao is great for listening. When I read that book, I'm like, this is so much more evolved than Western religion. It's just shocking. I just blew my mind. It's like this guy hit the bullseye. If you understand the Tao Te Ching, you got a manual for life, and it'll work whether you're a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, or a paratrooper. It's
been around a long time.
It's one of the most translated books in the world. I think it might be the most translated book in the world. I've probably read it 15 times, and I've got about, probably close to 18 or 20 different translations of it, because I like to see how different people interpret things like that. My next thing is that I wanted to touch on with you is, though I feel there are a number of potential sources of emotion within a human being, I observe that a lot of emotions we experience in our daily lives, such as how we react to others, has a lot to do with how we engage others or engage our unconscious and conscious values. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I'm sure you're familiar with Carl Jung.
Very familiar with him. His books are, his quotes are throughout my book.
Yeah. So Jung has 4 functions of consciousness. He calls it the consciousness compass: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. And in Jung's system of consciousness, there's always a dominant and a subdominant, then a sub-subdominant, and then the final of the 4 is the most repressed. It's still active, but it's in the unconscious. So in our culture, there's a grand majority of thinking, but feeling is repressed. Doesn't mean it's not active, just means you're not conscious of it. But when Jung describes the feeling function of consciousness, he distinguishes it from emotion, and he says that though it handles emotion, our feeling function is largely driven by values, whether they're conscious or not, and that emotions are often the reaction to situations with regard to whether or not we feel that a person or an experience aligns with or is antagonistic to our values. The example I give my students is if you're from the West and you've been standing in line for 20 minutes at the grocery store to check out, and a Chinese person jumps in front of you right when you're about to check out, you're probably going to have quite an emotional reaction, because in our culture, that's disrespectful. You wait, you take your turn. But in that culture, it's first come, first serve. All you got to do is look at videos of them getting on trains. It's like a rugby scrum, you know? And so I just wanted to explore that with you, because I think a lot of emotions arise due to what I call a values trespass. And I think it's an important way to conceive of how emotions get generated.
I love the question and the framing of it. I'm going to do the best I can to respond and understanding what I know of Jung. There's such things as default emotions. I think Jung would describe that as arising from you were either born with it or inherited from your family or background, but you'll have a default set of emotions. Everybody has the default emotion: touch a hot stove, withdraw your hand, right? But if we're raised in a family with certain sets of values, you're going to have default reactions. Why? You've seen your mom do it, you've seen your family do it, you've seen your friends do it, you're going to do it because that's the pattern that you've seen. And so I think it's pretty clear. Jung describes a lot of that comes from the subconscious, that much of what happens in your life is your subconscious keeps presenting default scenes to you, and you either go along with them or you challenge them and learn differently. I've been asked many times in the process of writing this book, can you change an emotion? Can you change a default emotion?
Yeah.
I'm sure, Paul, that there are swamis somewhere in India who can walk across a bed of hot coals without saying the word ouch, but I'm not sure I've
done it.
Oh my.
Yes.
All right,
well, I've done a real fire walk, and there's a whole process to it. Yeah, but you do have to hypnotize yourself, and you have to be 100% convinced, or you will get burned. Saw a lot of people end up in the ambulance because they couldn't hold the state of hypnosis through the fire walk.
I'm not going to try that. So that's not on my to-do list. Thank you. God bless you for doing it yourself. But my point is, to answer the question, can you change your emotions? Can you change your default emotions? The answer to that is yes. And how do you do that? Your subconscious is deeply influenced by repetition. So how do you change your emotions? The simple answer is you're first aware that you want to change your emotion, or that some response you've had is not optimal. Then you change your belief system. And that may mean a new religion. That may mean a new book. That may mean a new anything. And then the third is to repeat it. So beliefs are things that we agree with, that we tell ourselves. If you believe something, heart and soul, I'll use that term for now. If you believe something, heart and soul, and you repeat it to yourself every day for a year, it will manifest in your life, because repetition deeply influences your subconscious, and your subconscious is your default. So yes, you can change your emotions by changing your belief and repeating your new beliefs. And I think that's a pretty sturdy answer to sort of what you raised, which is, yes, you can, or which I attempted to answer, which is, yes, you can change your emotions by changing your beliefs and repeating that to the point of convincing your subconscious, and then you're on a different path.
Yeah, what I was trying to get more out of you on, though, is the connection between values and emotions.
Well, pardon me, I should have been more thoughtful there. I would almost equate beliefs and values. If you are a Christian, you have a certain set of values. If you're a Muslim, you have a certain set of values, and so on. If you're an agnostic, you have a certain set of values and beliefs, right? I would say beliefs and values are pretty close. In essence, something that you agree with, you say, I like that idea. I want to be that way. And so you repeat it. That's what I'm going to do. And you repeat it, and then it becomes a part of you. Many philosophers and seers have said, the world is a mirror of what you believe. If you believe that tomorrow will be a better day, and you say it to yourself every day, tomorrow's going to be a better day, you'll be amazed that in 6 months' time, tomorrow is a better day. If you believe that everything is a pile of crap and tomorrow is going to be worse than today, you will manifest. You will see that. Yes.
The answer is yes. I say, God always says yes. And people say, what do you mean? I say, what do you believe the highest form of love is if God is love? And they all say unconditional love. I said, well, unconditional love has to say yes because anything else creates a condition. So if you believe tomorrow's a shitty day, the answer is yes. That's why people say, be careful what you pray for. You might get it.
Because at a deep level, you go along with it. And it's important to be aware that what you repeat on a deep level is what becomes your life.
Yes. You kind of touched on where I wanted to go next. And the book's called Choosing Emotions. And I just know what I've had to do with so many therapists and myself. My God, I've done, everything that I do with any of my patients or clients, I always do myself first. That's my kind of personal code. I don't ask you to do a colon cleanse or a parasite cleanse if I haven't done it. I don't ask you to do art therapy if I haven't done it, et cetera, because I don't think the blind should lead the blind. But when it comes to choosing an emotion, we're really at the cognitive level of awareness. And as we talked about, the elephant's a lot more powerful than the rider. And I think that, you've studied Basil van der Kolk, and you probably studied many of the people that deal with trauma. And I think that sometimes a good example is how many people set a New Year's resolution and don't follow through. Well, research shows about 95 to 98% of people do not follow through. So they chose a resolution, which should be a placeholder for choosing an emotion, but there's oftentimes things going on underneath the conscious radar. Remember, the ego is only 3 to 5% of consciousness based on research. So the rest of us is subconscious and unconscious. That's a lot of the iceberg down below. And the unconscious and the subconscious are much more powerful. Bruce Lipton says the unconscious is 5,000 times more powerful than the conscious mind for processing information. And I think that the point I'm driving at here is I just personally, as a therapist, wouldn't want people to feel something's wrong with them if they try to choose an emotion, but they can't seem to get it to happen, because there's many things that I could point out, from biochemical changes in the body to structural changes in the body. I'll give you a great example. You may know about this, you may not. It's quite fascinating. When I first read this study, it didn't surprise me at all. And there's been a few of them now. Botox has gotten very popular, right? And what they found in psychological research is that when women get Botox on their face, they lose the ability to smile. And they found that it caused a significant increase in the likelihood of depression in those people, and that they were unable to access the emotions related to the smile because the muscles had been paralyzed by the Botox. So there's an example where, like, I work with people that have injuries and have rigid posture, and the body is very much linked to the mind, and it's a means of expressing the mind. So from the Botox example, we can see that person could try to choose to be happy, but have a hard time getting there because the body is unable to respond to the command. So that's one of a long list of them I could get. My point is just to point out that we need to be aware that the depth of the subconscious, which I consider to be the wisdom of the body, the unconscious is everything that you're not consciously aware of, but is happening, is significant. And that if we're not able to choose emotions after we've made attempts, or maybe we've tried, using subconscious programming and it's not working, it's just, to me, it's an indicator that we need to look deeper into you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If you're confused, try to take it down a level to something more fundamental. If I may, I'm going to share an embarrassing story about myself. My mother was an extraordinarily accomplished person. She was a good athlete. She was a painter, a dancer, a writer. She led several organizations, and I looked up to her greatly. When I was 10 years old, just in a moment of reverie, I turned to her, I said, "Mom, how do you do it? How do you do all these things? And you seem to do all these things pretty well." I love my mom. And she points at me with a sort of this motherly advice, and she says, "It takes a big ego to succeed in life." Well, Paul, my mother said it, and she was successful, and I just accepted it as truth. I believed in that moment, I believed ego was a good thing. Well, sadly, for the people around me, it wasn't so good. So 30 years later, having had a business career where I was a pretty insufferable guy, frankly, I got the results, but I wasn't somebody I'm proud of at this moment. So I'm starting to work on this book, and I finally reluctantly decide to dig into the word ego, thinking I'm gonna find that ego is the mark of successful people, and no, that's not at all what I found. And you're smiling because so
I know a fair bit about the ego. I got
Carl
a good
Jung's description of ego. I'm paraphrasing, of course. He says, ego is something a man spends the first half of his life building up and the second half of his life realizing the importance of dismantling. And it was 11 at night. I had my little dog curled up by my feet, and I put my head in my hands and I started to cry because I realized what I had misunderstood and that I had subjected a lot of people to something awful. And I was ashamed of it. Fortunately, I kept digging into ego, and I came across a wonderful quote from Eckhart Tolle, who we've talked about. And his remark was, the good thing about discovering your ego is that the minute you discover it, it starts to vanish because it survives in anonymity. It's when you realize you've got it that you realize I shouldn't have it, and recovery is pretty quick. And I took great comfort in Eckhart Tolle letting me off the hook. But I'm still ashamed to this moment of how in my business career I treated people with such authoritative baloney as my ego and subjecting them to that.
Health isn't just one thing, it's everything working together. And one of the fastest growing areas in health and wellness is integrated health, the middle ground between fitness and rehab. People who follow this path see real long-term results, and this field provides amazing opportunities for those looking for a career change or upgrade. The Chek Institute has been educating Chek practitioners for over 30 years. They learn a step-by-step system that integrates advanced assessments, functional movement, and lifestyle coaching as a unified approach, allowing them to help their clients find lasting success that simply can't be achieved by just following a single pathway. But sometimes getting started on a new path can be challenging. That's why we created the new Chek Integrated Health Foundation program, building on Paul Chek's system that's been refined for over 30 years and practiced by more than 70,000 Chek-trained professionals worldwide. It's self-paced with lifetime access, community, payment plans, and limited time bonuses. When you complete it, you'll be able to run a complete client process, screen lifestyle factors, assess movement, design client-centered plans, and deliver a high-end service session after session so your work becomes referable, respected, and built to last. So whether you're looking for a career change and wanting a roadmap, or you're a fitness trainer tired of commoditized sessions, or maybe a medical professional frustrated by poor follow-through between appointments, the new Chek Integrated Health Foundation program can help you find success and fulfillment. Go to paul.chekinstitute.com/Spirit Gym to learn more about the brand new Chek Integrated Health Foundation program.
Well, yeah, it's a process for all of us. And, that's what Jung calls individuation. That's what it is. You just described one of the key aspects of individuation. I'll share something about the ego with you that might surprise you. Do you know who Rudolf Steiner is? Yeah. Well, Steiner, I've got 185 of his books. I've been studying him for 30 years. Steiner gives the description of the word ego, and he says it comes from Greek, and the in ego, means of the, and go means earth. He says the word ego means that you are of the earth.
Never heard that. It makes perfect sense. Thank you.
It's interesting, isn't it?
There is so much wisdom out there. I've said this a few times. Mm-hmm. I wish I'd known so many of these things when I was 25. I would have lived, a different life. But, and
yes, well,
wouldn't we all have lived a different life? But
exactly.
This book does something really significant. It puts 1,800 of the best voices in the world from all cultures, backgrounds, faiths, you name it. It puts 1,800 really capable people in your camp. Why wouldn't you want the condensed advice and experience of really, really, really capable people? You would. And it's there. It's easy to access.
I think one of the things I got reading through your book is that it can give people a lot of courage that they're not stuck forever, and especially in the negative emotional states, and that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And a lot of great quotes that are about what, simply put, turning a negative into a positive, that there is a lot of freedom available to you if you know how to process the information the way a lot of the great people that you've shared have.
If I may, I'm going to read two more quotes about the importance of vocabulary.
Go ahead.
So this again is Lisa Feldman Barrett, the neuroscientist at Northeastern, the top 1% of scientists in the world. This is her quote, the more finely grained your vocabulary, the more precisely your brain can construct emotion. That's a lovely thought. Yeah. And then another one, Brene Brown, who I'm sure you're familiar with, the 6-time New York Times bestselling writer. One of her most recent books is Atlas of the Heart. Here's her quote about language. Language is our portal to meaning making. Having access to the right words can open up entire universes. It's really simple, but it's really powerful, and it's really true. And again, all of these leaders say the same thing, that if you can reduce your scene to words, if you can attach words to your situation, it may be a challenge, it may be an opportunity, you may be writing content for a brilliant new comedy, but it's about finding words. And you're liberated when you find words. You get a release. You're elevated. Your mood brightens. The lives of people around you brighten. It's about words.
Yeah. Words are extremely powerful for all the reasons you've mentioned and many more. I can see you've got your book cover in the background there, and you've got the heart and the head or the brain next to each other with a plug-in. And as I mentioned to you and you responded to in our email exchanges, I've studied heart math work. I actually had their chief scientist Roland McCarty on the podcast,
Wonderful.
which is a fantastic
I want to find
podcast,
that
by
one.
the way. Yeah, just search Roland McCarty. I think it's
I'm familiar with him.
ROLLIN. Yeah,
Right.
on my podcast, and it was a great one. You learn a lot about him. He's a very amazing man. But the heart math research shows clearly that the heart usually knows what's going on 6 seconds before the brain. And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is because I can say pretty confidently that most people are acting from their head, not their heart, the majority of the time, and that this is one of the true purposes of spiritual development, is to get to your heart. And heart math has practices and technologies that I've used clinically, and I have my own practices. But I think the issue I want to just share with you and just get you to expand on a little bit for yourself and your own way of looking at this is that if we choose emotions without heart involved, I think the transfer of our ability to create positive states or healing states or get out of stuck places like depression, anxiety, fear, insecurity are a lot harder to do. But if we get our heart involved, and for me, what I do with people is I always ask them, what is your dream? Like if you're depressed, I said, what is your dream? And they might say, well, my dream is to enjoy my life and enjoy my children. And so I might say, well, connect to your heart. And how do you feel when you visualize yourself playing with your children, enjoying your life? What do you feel in your heart? And I say, well, I feel, they might say, I feel love, or I feel a sense of joy. And all of a sudden they're talking about joy and love, and they think they're depressed. But if I just said, choose another emotion in their head, they might look at me and say, well, I really just, I don't even see how I could possibly do that. So I think it's very important to make the plug connect from head to heart so that we get the deepest part of ourselves involved and we have a sense of meaning as to why we want to change that emotion, not from an intellectual perspective, but from a deep connected state of
I love
being.
that. If you think back to the people that you, growing up and becoming an adult, people that you thought were happiest, a few men or women may pop into your head. And I think you'll probably, on reflection, agree that they were people who had both their head and their heart in alignment. They weren't thinking purely with their head. They weren't thinking purely with their heart. They were in alignment. And in fact, the science, I say the science is always evolving, but the science is really clear, heart math and otherwise, that the head and the heart each have separate thinking capacity. They're each in constant communication with each other. Daniel Kahneman and others have alluded to the fact that the heart is faster. The heart reaches its conclusions faster. All right, so I'm going to take a quick sidebar. When you were small, somebody said, Paul, use your head. And then somebody else said, Paul, follow your heart. And you go, well, wait a minute, use my head, follow my heart. Which is it supposed to be? It's supposed to be both of them in concert.
Yeah.
And the heart does think a little bit faster. So there's an expression in the book that says that the head is still analyzing all the angles while the heart already knows the score. What I've outlined in one of the appendices of the book is sort of the difference between the domains of the heart and the head. And if I may, this is not a discussion about physiological function. This is more metaphorical, but I think it's still fairly well supported by science. I'm going to give you a couple of different comparisons between the domain of the head and the domain of the heart. So the domain of the head is principally about facts, thoughts, and knowledge. The domain of the heart is more about love, emotions, and feelings. And again, this goes across centuries and multiple cultures, these divisions. Albert Einstein and Max Planck, each of whom won Nobel Prize, support what I'm telling you right now. All right, so the head is in charge of the body, monitoring bodily functions. The heart is in charge of the human spirit or soul. In fact, Oxford English Dictionary, the #1 dictionary in English in the world, defines the heart as the seat of the soul, which surprised me when I read that. But if Oxford says it, I guess that's a consensus. The head is in charge of science, and the heart is in charge of conscience. The head is in charge of physics. The heart is in charge of metaphysics. The head is in charge of intellect. The heart is in charge of intuition. The head is in charge of belief. The heart is in charge of faith. The head is in charge of words. The heart is in charge of poetry, and so forth. But they each have their own sort of jurisdiction. But when we're happiest, they're in alignment. And that's come to be known as emotional coherence, which is why on the cover of the book, I have a head and a heart plugging together with electrical currents. As you know, the Heart Math Institute, among others, have done advanced research about the electromagnetic fields around the head and the heart. And we tend to think, well, the head is where it all happens, but the electromagnetic field around the heart is many times more powerful.
Well, the magnetic field of the heart is 5,000 times stronger and bigger than the brain
think about
field.
That. I mean, that says a lot.
I do.
Of course. So aligning your head and your heart when you make an emotional decision, I mean, think about it. The people you've most looked up to, thought were happiest, most admired, you go, that person, that individual had their head and their heart in alignment. I mean, they're all there. They're not competing with each other. They're making whole level decisions.
This is all beautiful, but it's not complete yet. As a guy who's a therapist and studies anatomy and physiology and everything related to it, there's one piece I will add to this that's as important. In fact, if you look at the research on the abdominal brain, which is the solar plexus and the inferior mesenteric plexus, there's more neurons by far connecting to the brain and even to the heart than the heart has going to the brain. There's as many brain neurons in the solar plexus, which is the abdominal brain, as there is in your entire brainstem and spinal cord combined. And that's where we get our gut instincts from. And that is where our instinctual system, that's where the microbiome is communicating through the vagus nerve into the brain and also to the heart. And I think we have the issues that we've talked about with the head, we've got the issues to talk about with the heart. But now if we really want to bring ourselves into a state of coherence, we have to also include our instincts and our sense of what's real, because the instincts are really, not only are they there for survival, but Jung classified love and creativity as instincts, not just purely survival, but the instinct to create and the instinct to love. And the solar plexus is really the home of our instinctual drives. And it's also the part that connects the animal nature of us, which is our body, to our spirit, which is our heart, to our intellect and rational mind, which is our head. I think
I love
without
that.
a deep exploration, I think these three have to be connected.
100%. So if you go back to Rome, Julius Caesar, that era, 2,000 plus years ago, common expression on the street was trust your gut, right? Because you have the ability to articulate thoughts and emotions at that level too. Yes. So you identified it. Now that we're 2,000 years later and we have more advanced science, we know that the neurons in the gut, solar plexus, the heart and brain, you can think in various parts of your body, and it's integration. It's coherence.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. And there's many practices, Tai Chi, Qigong. In my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, I have zone exercise. They're all designed to integrate the brain, the heart, and the gut to create a stable state of coherence, which I think is a very important thing to do when people have unstable emotional states, because often they're coming from the disconnection between the heart, the gut, and the brain. And by synchronizing your breathing and your movement and keeping the intensity very low and relaxing your mind, the research shows that these are each called biological oscillators, the brain, the heart, and the gut. which means they're regulating rhythms in the body. But when you bring them into a state of coherence, then the whole body's moving together as one. And I think,
pardon me, go ahead.
I think that's important because a lot of negative emotions are coming from this state of incoherence that is often a side effect of what I'll bring up next.
Okay, so let's assume, just for simplicity, that it's just the brain and the heart. I agree with you. Solar plexus and the gut have their own processing capability, if not emotional capacity. But let's just say it's the heart and the brain, just for simplicity at this moment. When somebody says, I changed my mind, that's very different from somebody that says, I had a change of heart. And a change of heart typically means, across America, but across all cultures, it means a more foundational, fundamental shift in viewpoint. And I came across a wonderful quote from a pastor. Again, the book is not religious. It is all-inclusive of religions. There are at least 40 different religions represented in the book. But he's a pastor in Houston named Todd Stocker, and I love his quote, which is, a change of heart changes everything. And it's such a simple thought. And yet, if you're making decisions without your heart, you're doing something wrong. It's dangerous.
It's dangerous.
Follow your heart. A change of heart changes everything. I think in many respects, those two quotes highlight the powerful fundamental influence of heart thinking to your well-being.
One of my guiding principles is use your heart to feel what you know.
Wow.
That's my core spiritual practice.
Wow.
And when facing challenges in relationships or with yourself, ask the question, what would love do now? And see if you're capable of responding from that place. I was gifted that from one of my students who shocked the hell out of me when she walked into one of my classrooms, because I'm clairvoyant. And when I saw her energy field, I went, what in the world is this girl doing here? She had the most perfect translucent diamond I've ever seen in her aura, and her body was in the center of it, and it went about 3 feet above her head and 3 feet below the ground. So imagine if you could see a person's subtle energy fields, their aura, and you saw someone standing in this perfectly translucent diamond. And I went, oh my God. And so I told her what I saw, and she was overwhelmed with emotion. And I said, could I talk to you in private? I want to know how in the world you've done this. I've worked with a lot of masters of different types, and I've never seen an energy field like that in my life. And she said, well, Paul, I was having some challenges in my life. 3 years ago, I kind of hit rock bottom, and I found this spiritual master. She was from Singapore, and that's his only practice. That's all we do. We just practice using our heart to feel what we know and trusting our heart to guide us. So she said, the fact that you can see that tells me that the practice is working, because I can tell you 3 years ago, you wouldn't have seen that. And so that's where I got the practice. And right up here on my wall, as a gift to me, she wrote it down in Chinese and put the translation underneath it. And in many of my paintings, I've actually painted the Chinese words, use your heart to feel what you know, into my paintings to keep me reminded.
If with your permission, I may adopt that one myself. That's a beautiful quote.
Yeah. Her name's Suk. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but use your heart to feel what you know. What would love do now?
What an amazing thing for you to have perceived and for her to share with you. That's terrific.
Changed my life, and it's helped me help others change their lives. A lot of people. My students have been taught that repeatedly for obvious reasons. The next thing I wanted to bring up with regard to emotions is that we're in an environment that's pretty damaging, dangerous, and toxic. So we have, just as a couple of examples, a new car emits 68,000 chemicals a year for the first year, most of which are carcinogenic. A new carpet emits 132 carcinogenic chemicals into the air. We've got paints. We've got building materials. We're swimming in dangerous levels of electromagnetic pollution that can cause global inflammation in the body. We are eating the most toxic food we've ever eaten. Research recently showed in the Children's Health Defense newsletter, they took blood out of newborns and found that the average newborn baby, I think there was, I don't know, it was a big study, but they found 126 chemicals at toxic levels in newborns. So we've got problems with diet and lifestyle factors. We've got tremendous problems with hormonal imbalances across the entire spectrum of age. And we mentioned posture, and on goes the list. So I think that it's also important to remember that when we're trying to choose emotions, that if we're working against that, if the emotion is actually the body speaking to you and saying, hey, pay attention to me, we want to be careful not to try to use an intellectual substitute for something that's an actual indicator that we need to look inward for a potential problem like heavy metal toxicity or environmental pollution or electromagnetic pollution. I've known, for example, countless cases of patients that were suffering from a lot of anxiety and depression, and I tracked it back to the fact that they had high levels of electromagnetic pollution. In fact, I'll give you a case history. One of my clients was consulting me for health problems he was having. And when he described what he was feeling, I said, you have got a lot of symptoms of electromagnetic pollution. And he lived in a penthouse in Manhattan. He's a very successful man, been on my podcast a number of times. And I said to him, do me a favor. I want you to walk around on your roof, because he had a rooftop patio garden type situation. I said, see if you can see any cell phone towers anywhere. He got back to me right away and said, you're not going to believe it. Literally right across the street, there's a huge cell phone tower. So I had him get a building biologist come to his house, and it turned out he had 26,000 times the safe level of electromagnetic radiation going through his penthouse. And he had to spend about $1 million to have all the walls redone with lead paint and put a Faraday cage in there. And then his whole life changed. The inflammation, a lot of the emotional stress and things that were, kind of winding him up inside. And so there's just a case where we want to be aware that we could have emotions that are actually telling us about health issues, and just simply trying to choose a better emotion might be actually subverting an important message from the body. So I'll leave you to just respond to that however you'd like to.
I'll take a shot at it. So I've had a few mentors along the way. One of them was the chairman of my bank where I first went after I got to college. And we had a scene where I was one of many trainees in the bank's basement. And once a month, the chairman would come down and answer questions on a Friday afternoon. We, as 22-year-old kids, got to talk to a guy who was 60-ish and had been around. And he listened to a couple of the other trainees complain about this or that or the other. And he said to the woman and the guy who were about my age, he said, look, what you're describing is something that you can be either fearful about or you can do something about. And if it's of interest to you to do something about it, I'll help you. He said, if it's of interest to you to complain about it, you're on your own. Surround yourself with like-minded people and solve the problem. And to answer your question, Paul, if it's toxins, well, who wants toxins? But can you do something about it? I moved into an apartment 10 years ago. It looked lovely, and I moved in, and the next door neighbor knocked on the door and said, do you realize there have been 10 people that have lived in this unit in the past year? And I said, why? He said, well, because there's this huge electromagnetic field transforming station 30 yards away. You're being bathed in electromagnetic radiation, which is unhealthful, and everybody knows it, and it's everybody's moved out.
Rare for a landlord to be so honest.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I'd already signed the lease, and I thought, well, look, I'm stuck. I should have known better. I didn't realize it. I didn't ask the right questions. But within 20 minutes, I found an electromagnetic shielding device for a couple $100. I bought it. It arrived the next day. I haven't had a single problem. I moved from that place, but I'm more of a mind to solve the problem than to grouse about it. And I like you. I don't like toxins. I don't like carcinogens. I don't like any of that stuff. But I'm more the kind of person who will find a like-minded person to solve the problem. And I'm really appreciative that the chairman of the bank said, if you want my help, I will help you. If you want to complain, you're on your own. And I thought, that's not bad advice. And that's what stayed with me.
Well, a guy that I consider a friend of mine who's been on my podcast a few times is a very, very well-known psychologist, Keith Witt. He says, there's drama and there's solutions. You choose.
You're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to point out, and because of my knowledge of what I just brought up, and I'll rephrase it. Let's say you bought the book, Choosing Emotions, you're working with subliminal programming, but you're finding that you're having a hard time clearing an emotional state. If you're making an effort and it seems like you're swimming upstream, then I would say, go see a skilled healthcare professional or a Chek trained professional, get some blood work done, have an analysis. Don't just keep thinking something's wrong with me because I can't get this anxiety to go away or this fear to go away or this whatever it is. It could be a deep, important message coming from your body.
Absolutely.
And so
sometimes the bravest thing you can do is raise your hand and say, I'm not seeing this right. I need to consult somebody who's got broader awareness than me. A good therapist is worth their weight in platinum. I've been blessed to have a few good therapists, and I know, yes, raising your hand, I need help is the way to go.
Yeah. Hey, it's been a great journey, Doug. Thank you. As we close, I'd just like to invite you to share if there's anything you're working on now, if there's anything that you'd like to share as closing comments, if there's any websites you'd like to share, feel free.
Thank you. I'm the book is available. May I say where it's available? Yeah, it's available on Amazon. Yeah, thank you. Choosing Emotions.
That's why you're
Choosing Emotions. Website, choosingemotions.com. That's easy to remember. The book is available at Amazon in hardback, paperback, Kindle. It's available at Barnes & Noble, Ingram Spark, and other places. We're posting daily on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. This has been pure fun. And I'm working now on the third book to add a few different aspects. We're not necessarily adding additional emotions because the Choosing Emotions pretty well covers them, but there are aspects of language. And I've quoted several leading scholars about the importance of words. There's some subtleties there that are very powerful, and I'm exploring them in book 3.
Excellent. I look forward to that. Make sure you send me a copy, and I'll be happy to explore that and consider doing a podcast on it because I love that kind of stuff. That's why I have so many dictionaries. I've learned a lot from studying dictionaries of all types.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be on your show. I've loved the conversation. Your questions are just, they're terrific. So thank you, Paul.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all of you guys listening and watching. And I hope you enjoyed this journey into emotions. Make sure you get a hold of the book. I'll tell you what, the quotes are fantastic. I mean, if you're a quote collector like me, this is the gold mine. I got to give it. Doug's done the best job I've ever seen of collecting quotes. And even though they're on emotions, there's quotes in here that have to do with every part of your life. I can assure you that.
It's a fun read. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I'm excited for all of you to have this new emotional awareness that we've been working together with Doug to cultivate today. And thank you to my sponsors for all your love and support and amazing products. Thank you to all of you. Anything you buy from the sponsors puts money in the hands of ethical, moral companies that are funding local farmers, biodynamic farmers, organic farmers, wild fishermen that catch wild fish, the things that we all need to put our money to, and it helps the podcast. So no matter which way you go, everybody wins. And lots of love to all of you guys. Remember, you can choose your emotions. And I can't wait to share something awesome with you in my next podcast. And Doug, thank you so much for the gift of your hard work and your beautiful book. And tell your daughter we all say hello, and we hope she's
a nurse
feeling
now.
great.
She's done super. Thank you for that. And wonderful being with you. Thanks so much, Paul. All right.
Lots
Bye-bye.
of love. Ho-ho.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guest, D. Earl Johnston. Make sure to get your copy of Choosing Emotions available from Amazon and all good booksellers. You can visit his website at choosingemotions.com and connect on Instagram at DEarlJ2026. For more interaction with Paul and to get priority notification about an exciting new extension of his Spirit Gym program and community, go to myspiritgym.com and sign up to the waitlist. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the show on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.